Welcome to COSEM Equity Video Series number 2. And today's topic is Allyship. But first, we're going to be sure to take a moment to get centered and ground ourselves in a space with a mindful moment. So please join me by closing your eyes and taking 3 deep breaths. Those 3 deep breaths signaling to your body that we're starting this process. And taking a moment to appreciate the silence and appreciate the space of being able to take a moment to center. I'm going to ring the bell. When you can no longer hear the bell, please take that as a sign to open your eyes. Wonderful. So again, today's topic is allyship. And as we start each of our sessions, I just want to ground us again in our practice agreements. And the first is self-care and safety. Please be sure to take good care of yourself during this conversation. Sometimes equity conversations can trigger us or make us feel emotionally unsafe, which then feels like another kind of lack of safety. But just trust that you're safe and just simply uncomfortable, perhaps, which leads to, again, leaning into any kind of discomfort. If you're noticing any discomfort in the conversation, take a moment to practice your self-awareness and ask yourself why. And perhaps just kind of note that down and save that for some reflection for later. You can do another practice agreement of staying present. So you can stay with the conversation and stay with the flow. It's important in these conversations that we do not vilify white people. That's definitely not something I like to contribute to the space or be a part of. So many equity conversations these days are talking about whiteness, white dominant culture, white fragility, and all that is really good work. It's really healing for us. It is so necessary. And at the same time, we need to be mindful that these are our colleagues, these are our friends, these are our family, and hold them up in the same way that we would people of color. Hold the complexity of others' experiences without any judgment. So really honoring what folks are sharing, trusting the process of our time together. We'll be together about 45 minutes and just really trusting the process of what happens, what is shared. Step away from qualifying to say what you need to say and trust that it's from a good place. And practice your compassion for yourself and for others by speaking and listening from the heart and really holding your own space of curiosity and gentleness with yourself. And lastly, confidentiality, being aware that this is a recorded call. Tracy, the COSEM founder, shares and reminds us that she can edit something out if you say you don't want this on the recording. So that is something that she can do at the end. But just know that this is a recorded video series, and to honor that experience by sharing at your comfort level and that confidentiality can exist, but it's by your request. Okay. So again, those are agreements that I like to use for our equity work together. And as we jump into allyship, I want to invite anyone to ask any questions. If there's anything top of mind for you or anything that's come up in your practice or your work since the last month that we've been together, we got to ask the exam. Okay, it's not looking like we have any questions right now. So allyship, we're going to go into some allyship. And for those of you that are familiar with allyship is really a lifelong process of building relationships based on trust, consistency, and accountability with marginalized individuals and or groups of people. It's generally not self-defined work, though the work and the efforts need to be recognized by the people who you're seeking to ally with. And so allyship is generally used in the terminology that it's white people being allies to people of color. But allyship is not just that one dimensional. Allyship can go across ethnicities, it can go across gender groups, sexual orientation. So that is just something to keep in mind. For the purpose of our call today and our time together, we're going to be staying in the equity of the racial equity lens and using this in terms of white people being strong allies to people of color and holding the space there. So a resource we talked about before was by Layla Saeed and Me and White Supremacy, and her book will be coming out. And she draws a really interesting terminology around performative allyship and optical allyship. And performative allyship is really when people are being allies for the sake of performativity, being allies for the sake of getting that good ally cookie and wanting to be called courageous or inspiring or low down for the cause. And, you know, she switched to call them optical allyship because that really resonated with her more because it's like an optical illusion, where optical allyship is that virtual illusion that you're really being an ally or an activist, but you're not putting in the work of being an ally, putting in the work of the activism, because if you're not being an activist with risk, then you're really not into the activism of what's going on. And so this is just really important for us to discuss. In the context of whiteness, allyship centers whiteness being about the person and how does it look and feel. So it's important when we look at allyship as a person of color, I need to be clear with my allies and what it looks like to be an ally to me. And as a white person, that is something they would want to seek out from those that they're wanting to ally with. Like, you know, is what I'm doing helpful? Is this what you need? Not from a like a colonial perspective where you might offer it to someone else based on not asking anything and just coming in and saying, oh, this is what they need, and acting from that place. Before I move on and share any kind of examples on how this allyship can show up, does anyone want to ask anything or say anything?
I'm excited to learn more.
Okay. Are people familiar with allyship?
Not at all. No.
The concept, yes, but it's specifically not so much.
Okay, cool. So I'm going to ask you that if you have any paper or anything like that, because I'm just going to read from a list. And so if you're interested in jotting anything down that resonates with you in terms of how you might have been acting in an optical allyship sort of way, then giving you that opportunity to do so. Okay. So here's a list. Here is a non-exhaustive list of examples of optical allyship. Jumping on the activism or allyship bandwagon without doing any real self-reflection work on your personal racism or personal white privilege. Creating the look of being an ally by tokenizing people of color. Reposting anti-racism posts and virtue signaling so that everyone knows that you're an ally, but not doing much more work beyond that. Positioning yourself as an ally or activist leader while continuing to step over, talk over, speak for the sake of speaking, and take over spaces of people of color. distancing yourself from your own white supremacy by continuously complaining about how awful other white people are. Creating campaigns and moves for anti-racism that are really about building your social capital or helping to alleviate any form of white guilt that you might be experiencing. Only showing up for the fun, easy, glamorous work and disappearing when it's time to do the real work, the work that makes you uncomfortable or can be hard. Clinging to symbols like the pink pussy hats, safety pins, and hashtags, overdoing the real work. So instead of bringing activist words and people of color images into your brand to make your business look more woke. Acting like an ally in public, but harming people of color behind closed doors. And that also includes not speaking up for people of color when they're not in the room. Going out of your way to be extra nice to people of color with hopes that you'll be seen as quote unquote a good white person. And there's 3 left. Showing up only when it makes you feel or look good, or when you feel you get some sort of reward out of it beyond just doing the right thing. Only sharing the work of people of color who you deem to be palatable to the white movement, and doing the bare minimum to look like an ally without really risking anything. So we look at this form of allyship so that we can see how we might be practicing any type of white saviorism or any type of tokenism, and where we get to kind of self-evaluate through that self-awareness lens of where our intention is coming from. And the more that I get into allyship and working with people around allyship, it can be very complex and very painful and challenging work. If you're feeling at all torn right now or wondering if that's me, I worked with a white colleague once who said the best thing that I'd ever heard. And she said, if I have to wonder if it's me, I'm just going to assume that. And that was a really nice gateway for her to be more exploratory of her own self-awareness. I'll be quiet for a moment and hear from other folks. In terms of how this may have landed for you, what it may have brought up for you.
I think that it's great having like a list to really help people reflect and find where we might be falling ourselves, if we're within these types of listing options, or if we are falling outside of it, and if we are advocating and we are taking those risks. And I think it's just a good opportunity to see if there's even more ways to be a voice and be an ally.
Thank you for that. Definitely. Is there one thing that you're willing to share that perhaps you feel like you may have taken part in? Or one that really resonated with you? Someone might be driving. If they could mute their phone, that would be helpful. Thank you.
I want to share just something that was an awareness that really showed brightly to us after our first conference. And Tama Productions made this beautiful film for us, but when I was excited to show it to the board and everybody, it just became very clear that it was a very white conference. And it was even like, there were conversations around, can we find some footage to show? I mean, it was a little comical, like but then it immediately, then the guilt sets in, like, okay, no, we need to show what it was. But it was helpful to see it in that way. I think if we hadn't necessarily seen that film and seen it so clear, then it couldn't have helped us made our intentions for the next year of really, I mean, obviously, like, we had to start somewhere. It was just, the first year was, let's just get anybody and whoever we would think to invite, we would. But we really made it our goal to be more intentional about our outreach, and finding I set the intention to try to find someone to co-lead with me who could help us. I had learned about Dr. Angela Black with systemic whiteness in the mindfulness and education movement, and I just thought we had the opportunity. But I kept having to recheck. I'm like, okay, am I just do it, like, is my intention clear? Am I just trying to, like, I don't want to just feel like I'm putting a figurehead. Like, I think one of them that you listed off was like branding or showing that our organization is this, but that we're not. So yeah, so that was my first. But then I found you, Tovi, and you just made it so comfortable for me. But I initially, though, when I saw your email and we had a conversation, and I'm like, at what point do I ask her if she wants to be the president? Is that just, is this awkward? Or it's just awkward in general for me to have to figure out each year who the president's going to be. So there's no way around that. But so.
I think it's a wonderful observation. And, again, with this being such a journey that everyone is on together in terms of our own racial healing, to have the distinct lesson of the video and seeing the absence of, I mean, some people look at videos like that and don't see the absence of. All right, so there's always, a flip side. And so to have also been so proactive, so intentional and fast about that, and setting the intention for things to be different, I think is just really that's part of the beauty of the work of even being self-aware and using a lens that's really inclusive. It's, beyond allyship, I think, in what you're naming as well. And, I think it was John Kabat-Zinn who responded to the email and just even named as well that, the mindfulness movement has been such a white space in the United States that we are just helping to kind of swing the pendulum. And I think that we're in that space of seeing how that's evolving. And kudos to COSEM for being on the front end of wanting to be more inclusive, of working with schools that are diverse and inclusive, and doing an equity series. So there's work that's being done, and I don't say that to like stroke you or anything like that, but it's really as we start to put the work in perspective, because I think that white guilt is probably extremely painful, and I feel the pain when I see white people feel guilty about something that is really, especially for people who are working so hard to be different and to make a difference. So that's something I'm working on with myself, and like what to do with that guilt in that situation, and sit in the discomfort of it, because it comes up quite a bit when I'm working. And so that's part of my growth and my self-awareness is how can I hold that and also help to alleviate it. So, well, thank you for sharing that. Yeah. Does anyone else want to share anything before we move on? Okay. There was one other thing I was going to share. And one is, I just remember being with a colleague, and it really brought, this was probably 5 years ago, and I was helping to rid the high school. I was the principal, getting rid of a racist mascot. We had the racist mascot called Colonel Reb, which was short for Rebels. And we were the Rebels. And I was a young teacher at this high school before I became the principal. I was 22 years old. I started teaching there, and they would run the Confederate flag up and down the football field before the games. We're talking about in the Bay Area of California in 1994. Like, they would run this, and I spoke to the principal about it, and I said, this is not okay. And he was a white man, and he was like, we will not do this anymore. He's like, I understand, and if it makes anyone uncomfortable, then we need to stop doing it. So that was his mindset, which I really appreciated, because then it was at that point that I really started really getting into my own journey as a young African American teacher. And so fast forward 15 years later, I have left this school and I've come back to this school as the principal. And the superintendent at the time gives me the charge to get rid of this racist mascot. And I'm like, whoa, can't do that. I cannot come in as a Black woman leader, and the first thing I want to do is get rid of a mascot that's been here for 50 years and that the entire community loves and adores. The high school was the flagship school, named after the city itself and everything. And so I said, no, I need to establish some things first as an instructional leader in some different ways, so that I don't get targeted as this angry Black woman coming in wanting to change the mascot. So in my third year is when we started this movement and this mission to change the mascot. And we would have a lot of meetings after school. Districts often do this, where like once a month, all of their school leadership will come together and do equity meetings. I think it was, might have been Mimi or Karen who brought it up on the last call, just saying that, they're doing an equity series at their school. So very common to do a monthly meeting. And we were talking about different things that we could be doing in our leadership. And so again, this came up, Tovi, we need you to do this, change this mascot. And I remember thinking, oh my gosh, this is like major. And some of the white colleagues in the space said, oh, we're going to help you. We're going to be there for you. You can count on us. And, when it gets really hard, you call on us. We'll come to the meetings. And I remember sending an email to one of the white male colleagues who stood up and declared his allyship to me. And I sent him an email asking him to come to a meeting that was in the community. And I really wanted to feel supported by people, because I was getting a lot of hate mail on Facebook and in my inbox and such. And oh my gosh, I kid you not, his response to me via email was, I'm sorry, I don't do evening meetings.
When other time is there a meeting?
Oh gosh.
Oh.
Yeah. First of all, I was hurt. Then I became shocked. Then I became angry. Then I went into my whole other rage and with other things. And I was in disbelief. I couldn't believe it. But at the end of the day, I was truly so hurt and so taken aback. And even to this day, and this was again 5 years ago, one, it stands out to me as a very painful moment when you think you can count on an ally as a person of color. And the other is, where was my own courage? Where did I feel that I should have had a response to him? Like, I've never said anything to him about how bad that hurt me. And I guess maybe I was too tired, like racial fatigue. This one battle, and here I am going to create another battle to go have this conversation with this man. So racial fatigue and having racial resilience is very real in all of our work. But that's like what I still continue to sit with to this day. And when that story does come out in whatever form it's going to come out in, I know this man will think of himself. And will I speak with him before that? I don't know yet. We'll see. But yes, just sharing that story of how allyship can go bad, meaning someone is offering to be an ally, and then when it comes down to really do the work, that they don't. So I just wanted to share that as a firsthand experience. There are some things that we can do as to support our white colleagues, and that white colleagues can be asking themselves if they want to be a strong ally. And so these are the things that are considered worth looking into. So do you listen and ask how you can help? So if you're supporting a cause for people of color or supporting an equity and inclusion space for people of color, being cautious not to take over the space, being cautious to ask, what will help look like from me? How can I help? That's huge. It sounds super simple and really basic, but it is so fundamental that it's always number one as the thing that you can do. The other is, don't expect people of color to educate you about their own identities and the struggles of their particular culture or race. Do your own homework on that. There's plenty out there. So spending some time to learn about other cultures and other races from people of color based media, like from the true sources. Accept criticism thoughtfully. So if someone does come to you with feedback, be curious about that feedback instead of defensive. Definitely doesn't look good if you broadcast your qualifications about why you should be an ally or how you're an ally or that you're a great ally. Like, that is not helpful. And speaking up when you hear biased language. So again, speaking up and interrupting and helping to dismantle any inequities is extremely helpful, both in the presence of people of color, so that it takes some of the weight off of us, and also definitely in the absence of people of color. Because generally, that's when you're going to get a better response from someone else who may be struggling with white fragility. They're less likely to be fragile in an affinity group of other white people than they would be if someone of color was in the room. Don't apologize for your actions of your own identity group. Like, just don't apologize for white people. Again, that leads to guilt also, but it doesn't really help the situation. It's just simply own your own space and own your own identity and the work that you're doing. Seek support from people who have been allies within your own identity group. So if you're a white woman, who are allies that you are familiar with that are being supportive allies as white women and that are being well received, those would be the people who you want to get support from. Don't ever expect credit for being an ally. Like, that's getting that, that gold star for really just doing the right thing. Being sure to acknowledge intersectionality. And intersectionality is, of course, when there's overlap. It's like you could be a homosexual African-American woman. Okay, there's other ways that there's intersectionality. There's feminism, there's gender, there's sexuality, there's race. So there's a lot there, and just to acknowledge that, and being compassionate with yourself and always self-reflective is extremely critical to the work and to the conversation. So those would be things that are considered the right thing to do. And that was resourced from an article from Teaching Tolerance magazine, one of my favorite magazines. Yeah. I'm going to open up the floor again for any feedback, questions, ahas, sharings.
I also use Teaching Tolerance for so many things. It's a great resource to have. And then something that I keep coming back to is that I've been hearing is, we're creating safe spaces, but I think also we need to be creating the brave spaces. And there's a difference between the both, right? And you really need both. create that space, but then it's becoming that brave, and the brave spaces within. So it's something that's sticking with me lately a lot.
I love that, Lindsay. Thank you for that. Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And there's so much bravery that is needed in this work. Gosh.
Yeah.
And part of the bravery is, being vulnerable to even be in the space. So that's huge in and of itself.
Yeah,
for sure.
And the other thing that you had mentioned as we're talking about the things that we can do, especially as a person who is a white female, I think that it's important to know that they're very simple things, but you still need that brave piece to be able to do it. But listen, right? That's the biggest thing we could do, is just listen, and then just asking, how can I help? I think those are the biggest things that we can do to help advocate for all people, and provide voice, but then also taking that step back, that I'm not your voice and you're not my voice, but together we can become one voice together. So.
And that makes me think about something that wasn't on the list that I find very important, is that often in mixed groups, a lot of times white people are silent in the work, and that's really hard for people of color, is the silence. It's like we want to hear a contribution. We want to hear an acknowledgement. We want to hear your voice in the space. And so many times it feels like white people are like in the space experiencing it, but shutting down off what to say, of course, for fear of saying the wrong thing. But if the space has been set up well, then saying the wrong thing can still be that growth space and still be valued. It's so important. Yeah. There's nothing worse than hearing that people went out and said all this stuff afterwards and didn't say it while in the space. We are closing to time, so if there's anything else that anyone wants to ask or share, we can do that. And then, of course, we have our closing poll. Okay. So we'll just take another quick moment, a mindful moment, just closing our eyes and taking 3 deep breaths. We'll ring the bell. And I will share this poem as we close. It's called Being an Ally, and the author is unknown. You and I, we meet as strangers, each carrying a mystery within us. I cannot say who you are. I may never know you completely, but I trust that you are a person in your own right, possessed of a beauty and value that are the earth's richest treasures. So I make this promise to you. I will impose no identities upon you, but will invite you to become yourself without shame or fear. I will hold open a space for you in the world and support your right to fill it with authentic vocation and authentic purpose. For as long as your search takes, you have my loyalty. I am your ally.